yeah, we're gonna get knocked down and get back up and be steadfast and determined and work hard. She said I was a magpie. And I think the implication was that I flitted from thing to thing. I wear that sort of as a badge of honor. Some would say I've had a very non-traditional academic career, and frankly, it would have been easier if I had stayed on a single path. And yet, it's been super rewarding to do all these different things, and I can see the through lines.
Welcome back to another episode of the Addy Hour podcast. As always, I appreciate the ways that you all are tapping into these conversations. As always, I also encourage you to continue to like these episodes, share it with your friends, and make sure we continue to spread the word about these really important conversations. Today, I'm honored to host part 2 of our conversation about transformative leadership. And I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Charles DK. This is going to be another one that's going to be really important. I know you all are going to get a lot out of it. And this is someone who I just met recently, but who I was introduced to through a mutual connection, and someone who's definitely doing transformative work. So I know you all are going to get a lot out of this conversation. And it's something that I'm really eager to jump into as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Jeannette Ickovics, who is joining me here. Dr. Ickovics is the Samuel and Lissolette.
Samuel and
I guess
Lissolette.
correctly. Okay. Lissolette Herman Professor of Social and Behavioral Sciences and a Professor of Psychology here at Yale. In 2018, she was previously serving actually as Dean of Faculty at Yale and U.S. College in Singapore, so we may get into some of that role as well. She did that role from 2018 to 2021. And she's had lots of different leadership positions. So I'm not going to go into all of them, many of them at the Yale School of Public Health, but just to highlight one, she was the founding director of CARE, which is Community Alliance for Research Engagement, again, as part of Yale's inaugural Clinical and Translational Science Award. She also has served as deputy director for the Yale Center for Interdisciplinary Research on AIDS. And so as you are going to hear in this conversation, someone who has a lot of different leadership experience in a lot of different realms, and someone who is continuing to make impact. But just to give you all a taste, Dr. Ickovics' research investigates the interplay of complex biomedical, behavioral, social, and psychological factors that influence both individual health and community health. And she uses that lens to really to look at the challenges that many people face when it comes to these things, but specifically focusing oftentimes on those who are marginalized by the healthcare system and by society. So again, I've only given you all a glimpse. I know a lot more is going to come out in this conversation, but it's my true honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Jeannette Ickovics to the Addy Hour podcast.
Thank you, Nate. It's my honor and privilege to be here.
Of course. And thanks so much for making the time.
Pleasure.
And as I mentioned to you, as my listeners know, I always like to start out with a check-in. So just to see, there's so much that's going on in the world. I'm not going to list it. People know all of the details of the challenges we continue to face. But how are you doing at this point in time, just as you navigate, just as all of us do in this world today?
So I'll answer that by saying my microenvironment is good. I'm happy, healthy, well, family, friends, community. But it's sort of despite the chaos in the world, I am so deeply troubled by the destructiveness, by the destruction of all the so many things I care about in terms of, first and foremost, humanity, the values of truth, justice, integrity, and then I know the institutions I care about, education, higher ed, the environment, health and healthcare. And as we're here to talk about today, the impact on people in terms of their health and mental health. So it is impossible really to ask or to answer that question without recognizing the social context in which we are all living. And it is, I guess in many ways, it's made me, for sure, feel the need to redouble my efforts and make the work that we do and others around us even more important.
Well, I appreciate that level of honesty, as I often share when people are just being honest about what they feel with everything that's going on, and holding those two worlds together too. You did also mention redoubling your efforts, and that was where as I was listening to you, that was one thing that was coming to mind. How do you actually reconcile that those two realities of having things good in your microenvironment, but also the things you're passionate about. I guess another way to say is what does that actually look like when it comes to that doubling down?
So I think I mean sort of doubling down in work, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
maybe I'll also say, let me think about sort of on the personal side around doubling down is certainly the self-care
Yeah.
issues that are so important. And for me, that's all the things we know matter about for health. It's physical exercise. I have a yoga and meditation practice. It's good eating. It's the social support. It's being there for family and sort of extended family, and really nurturing those relationships.
Yeah.
Of course, then as we extend out, it's around nurturing the relationships with the students who I have the privilege of teaching and mentoring and learning from, and my colleagues, particularly my young colleagues who are struggling around the academic expectations and the funding environment. And then, again, more broadly, right, the circles or the pebble in the pond and the ripple effects.
Yeah.
The doubling down for work means really honing in, focusing on what I think is important, the things I've chosen to focus on, which I know we'll get into, and being sure to build durable collaborations that cut across sectors, that, really what I'm hoping is where we will have the most impact. And I guess I'll jump ahead a little.
Yeah, feel free.
And I'm guessing maybe you may take us back because I have done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Right now, I am doubling down on my work on climate and health. And today, the administration has rescinded the endangerment rule, which basically takes away the policy level protections for and the recognition that climate change harms human health. And that means the knock-on effects for that are profound, because they will affect our clean water, clean air, and that along with other dissolution of other policies and institutions, let's just say for now in this realm, of course, is going to lead us to a place where we are not going to hit those climate targets, where the impacts of extreme weather, heat, flooding, drought, air particulate matter from wildfires, all of these things, the impacts on health and mental health are going to continue to escalate. So back to the doubling down and the adjustment I've made, I am working in a multi-sector partnership, private sector, public sector, philanthropic sector, academia, and that really matters. And the funding is not from the U.S. It is from the U.K., where I see them doubling down to also because it fits with their commitments and their dedicated practice to the health of people and the planet. And so we need to, if we can't do it here, we do it there, and we do more, and we do better. And we find the people who we like and respect, and want to be partners in action.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that answer. And even though we just met, the answer doesn't surprise me. Just in the sense of, I can hear your passion for the work, even though you're only talking about one part of the work. And I'm also sensing your holistic approach to really investing in, whether that's family, whether that's students, whether that's early career faculty. And so I'm already seeing those things
Thank you.
cut across as well. And it's also refreshing to hear in the midst of everything, that we're experiencing as a society and everything you're trying to do as well.
Yeah.
So
I have a level of intensity. I'm definitely work hard, play hard. So I do both with a lot of passion.
Yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
that doesn't surprise me at all. So just to also peel back a little bit for any listeners who may not have heard from you before, especially those that are outside the academic space and are using this podcast to really get some understanding for things that we do in academic circles. Can you take people through a little bit of a journey of how did you get to this place that you are today in terms of your career and vocation?
All right, cut me off a little, or I'll try to break it
Yep,
up a
you're totally
bit. So I'm a first gen.
fine.
Let me start even back further. My parents were immigrants. They are Holocaust survivors, which we can go into at some point later, perhaps or not. But they came to the U.S. in 1961, having experienced unimaginable loss and devastation. And they laid a foundation for me, as many immigrant families do, with valuing education and sheltering me a bit, in terms of, their trauma did not become my trauma, I'll say.
Okay.
So, first gen college student, went from college right to grad school, right to a postdoc here at Yale in 1989 at the age of 25. So I was sort of on a on a bit of a fast path. And I'll just pause for a second and say, in many ways, I would say, in terms of inspiration, my parents, although they are no longer alive, continue to be part of that feeling of importance and fueling the fire. The recognition, again, of hard work and discipline and making the world a better place and not standing for injustice and discrimination, right? All of that comes from my mom and dad, Rachel and Barry, and that's a really strong foundation. Professionally and then academically, so I landed here at Yale in 1989. I would, if you had said to me then, or any really time along the way, I'm not sure that I definitely would not have predicted that we would be sitting here 36 years later. But it certainly hasn't been boring. I have had opportunities to leave and actively chosen to stay.
Okay.
We should come back later to the Singapore thing, but that was certainly, I was gone for 5 years.
Right.
And so that was a big, important refresh then. But let me go back to, well, actually, let me stop talking for 1 sec and just ask the question one more time around the path, the journey.
Yeah.
I was going to pick up again from the beginning of the work and then carry that forward.
That's totally appropriate. And this, again, is just, just speaking on behalf of listeners, this is some of the key pieces that's been really nice on this podcast for people to hear. How do people get from point A to point B?
Okay.
And again, as you already know, especially when we're talking with our students, helping everybody remember it's not a direct line.
Definitely not a direct line.
And sometimes I think people assume that, you just did X, Y, Z, you end up here, without knowing the zigzags or the detours or the disruption along the way.
Yeah.
So I'm not putting that on your story, but whatever, wherever you want to, kind of give that.
And what's interesting to me is, like, even though from the outside it probably doesn't look like there are many zigzags, because this has been my home institution for my whole career. I certainly didn't start from a place of privilege or again, could not have imagined myself here to begin with, let alone over time. But the mentorship, the sponsorship, the guidance, the care, the community here, really just has been incredibly rewarding and fulfilling and meaningful. And so the zigs and zags that I'll describe are again, maybe more within this internal space, but have touched a lot of different external spaces, even though it's within one institution. I'll start with one other just sort of sidebar, and then I'll tell you the pieces. So somebody once called me, and I know she meant this as a criticism. She said I was a magpie, and I think the implication was that I flitted from thing to thing. I wear that sort of as a badge of honor. And I'll just mention high level. So when I came here, I was really interested and worked in women's health
Mhm.
and started that in a general way. And I'll even give you like a little deeper nugget with Judith Rodin,
Mm.
my mentor, and continues to this day. But with her, we wrote a piece for the American Psychologist on women's health. And by design, we chose to focus on things that hadn't been
Mm.
receiving as much
Okay.
attention. So, for example, we wrote about lung cancer instead of breast cancer,
Mm. Yeah.
and lung cancer being a major determinant of morbidity and mortality for
Mhm.
women, but hadn't received a lot of
Right.
attention at that time, and other things as well, reproductive health
Mhm.
and so on. There was 3 paragraphs on HIV and AIDS, and that was at a time when AIDS was still being called gay-related immunodeficiency disease, or GRID.
Mm.
And so we wrote these 3 paragraphs on women and the differences, both in terms of heterosexuality
Mhm.
and sort of the differences in sexual relationships,
Mhm.
but also in power structures and
Yeah.
in their social and economic differences for women at
Mhm.
risk and with HIV and AIDS versus men. So, so we went from women's health writ
Mhm.
large to suddenly an interest on women and HIV.
Mm.
From there, to a focus on pregnant women with HIV, so that because there were tools to prevent maternal to
Mm.
child
Mm.
transmission.
Mhm.
From there, identifying that many pregnant women with HIV were also very young,
Mm.
were teens and young women. So went from this women's
Yeah.
health
Wow.
to this, over the course of
Yeah.
a few years,
Mhm.
but really honing in
Mm.
on a particular group of young women and
Mm.
young pregnant women, and also expanding to really think about prevention.
Mhm. Mhm.
Another probably topic we can come back to. So I spent most of my career in the women's health
Okay.
space and reproductive health, in promoting and supporting the healthiest pregnancies. A big piece of the work that I'm really proud of, and again, was with Jessica Lewis,
Mm.
who's here, a
Mhm.
long-term collaborator, but many other psychologists,
Mhm.
obstetricians, midwives, and so on, developing and scaling up models of
Mm.
group prenatal care, initially developed by midwife Sharon Rising,
Mm.
again, who was here at the
Mhm.
time, affiliated with the School of Nursing, and pushing that out, of designing randomized control trials,
Mm.
s- starting small with
Yeah.
descriptive studies,
Yeah.
but scaling those up,
Yeah.
and then nationally and then internationally with
Mm.
that work.
Mhm.
So that was really for 20 plus years, been
Right.
focused on that. So then here comes one of the zigs is I was asked to lead you mentioned this
Yeah.
actually, the community core for Yale's first Clinical and Translational Science Award.
Mhm.
And we did that and we developed what is called CARE,
Mhm.
Community Alliance for Research and Engagement, which lived here at Yale
Mhm.
fully for the first 10 years. Happy to say it now co-sits here as well as at Southern Connecticut
Oh,
State
wow.
University.
That's great to hear.
And it's about coming up on its 20th
Wow.
anniversary, and is itself as an institution is healthy and
Mm.
well funded and well
Yeah.
supported and
That's great.
well respected in the community. During those care days, we
Mhm.
were focused on chronic disease
Mm.
prevention
Okay.
and particularly obesity prevention at sort of a hyper-local level
Mhm.
in New Haven, but also in New Haven neighborhoods.
Mm.
Again, did a mix of things uh, with the community, qualitative, quantitative policy work,
Mhm.
randomized controlled trial in the New Haven Public
Mm.
Schools,
Mhm.
followed middle school kids across from 5th grade to 8th
Mm.
grade, looking at nutrition and physical activity
Mhm.
policies. So that was like one of those. Then here comes like another one of the little
Yeah.
mini things, the zigzags. 2017 was invited to go to Yale NUS College
Mhm.
in Singapore.
Mhm.
Went there for a year as a visitor. Was asked to stay on as dean of faculty. So for those almost 5 years, 4.5 years, I was not so involved in research
Right.
directly. Was doing stuff, was
Okay.
writing
Mm-hmm.
and continuing to stay engaged,
Yeah.
but not, I was responsible for 140 faculty
Right.
across the sciences, social sciences, and humanities. So I was a little burnt out with all the grant writing and all
Mm-hmm.
the whatever.
So timing
And
may have been good.
timing was really good. And personally, too, it was
Mm.
awesome to live in
Yeah.
Southeast Asia, to bring my kids up there for
Mm.
some years
Wow.
and have them see the world from a bigger perspective
Yeah.
than Connecticut.
Yeah.
Um, and then again, this is sort of high level, but then this latest, I forget if I'm on a zig or a zag, but when I returned and was getting ready to return to New Haven in 2022, people kept saying to me in Singapore, "What are you going to do when you go back?" And I just had this really visceral response, which is, I don't want to go back. I want to go forward.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I had the luxury of some time to reflect.
Mm.
Um, I I wanted to think about doing something new. The climate crisis was huge, and I saw it again in a different way from being in Southeast Asia
Yeah.
and what
That's
was
true.
happening here. I have two sons. One of them was involved in climate action.
Mm.
He inspired me a lot.
Mm.
And then the other piece of that puzzle was a friend in Singapore who was and is the executive director of the Resilient Cities Network. I recognized the value of that network of 100 cities globally. And I thought, okay, I really don't know anything about climate and climate change, but I know a lot about health. I know a lot about mobilizing community, and I know a lot about research and bringing together research teams to evaluate, to develop interventions and to evaluate and, hopefully to have some impact. So I think this back to the magpie title.
Yeah.
Some would say I've had a very non-traditional academic career because I did women's health and then chronic disease and now climate. And frankly, it would have been easier if I had stayed on a single path. And yet it's been super rewarding to do all these different things. And I can see the through lines. Hopefully you can
Yeah,
too.
definitely. And I think that's, again, refreshing and helpful, not just for me, but for listeners to hear too, because it's too easy to see someone like you and say, well, how did that work? Without actually knowing some of that. And even just knowing your family history too, the way you kind of talk through that. And it seems that, there are several through lines there. One of them, which seems is your passion and really tying into problems that need to be addressed. But then also community and not doing that in isolation. All the different aspects of the communities that you mentioned as well. So I think that's really helpful in a lot of ways. It also makes me very curious about where, and you may have alluded to this, but where some of that comes from. Because again, even before we met, one of the things that struck me just in kind of reading through your profile is the uniqueness of deep local investment and global investment and everything in between.
Yeah.
And this is not to say this is not unique to Yale, but it is consistent with a lot of high-powered research institutions that sometimes there's this tension of, are you a local person who's investing locally, or are you doing things globally that are going to change the whole landscape? And there are often conversations to be had, which we won't all voice here, about the tension between those and who gets accolades for who does what. So where did that come from to be able, because that one, where did it come from? And I think you've referred to how you've made that, because that's not also easy to actually put into action. So that's a wide ranging question, but I'll let you take it however you want.
It is. I'll take one stab at it, and I'm sure again there are some other threads we could pull through, but I'll do that, and then I'll also say there's also this I'll say up and down or different times, different things at different times, right? So the pregnancy work that began in HIV and then became more broadly about healthy pregnancy, and by the way, there's also some work we're still doing in that realm as well. But, that started local. It started with an initial studies here at Yale New Haven Hospital. Some of the work was also with Fairhaven Community Health Center
Okay.
and Hill
Yeah.
Health Center, our two FQHCs, and then more broadly across the state of Connecticut.
Okay.
We did these randomized trials, so started local.
Yeah.
We did these randomized trials. They did good accolades because they were rigorous, and because the very first RCT, we documented a 33% reduction in preterm birth
Okay.
and a 41% among Black women who had a higher base rate to begin with. Now we're, again, another piece we could come back to around maternal morbidity and mortality that we're really facing crisis now too. But that work, because of the big effects that we had, and what we did was group prenatal care is an integrated model. Instead of 10 minutes, you've got each visit, you've got 10 people for 2 hours, and as fellow psychologists, even in the neuroscience space, we are building on social support of women with women of the same gestational age. So we would have taken all women who were due, it's February, let's say in February,
Right.
and carry them. They carry each other, and we carry them through that pregnancy together. This is not a support group. This is their prenatal care in a group setting, building support between them, among them and their providers. And had these incredible effects. I think that social support results in, when I get into the mechanism, stress reduction, better mental health, which we did document, and all of those things, less inflammatory markers running through the body, helps to sustain a pregnancy longer. So you have less preterm birth, less low birth weight, small for gestational age, and then a cascade of other positive effects. So because of that, so started local, grew national, grew international. So that went from local really to global. Then I literally, went across an ocean. Oh, wait, back to care. So then we're back to this hyper-local, like not just New Haven, but 6 neighborhoods in New Haven.
Wow. Yeah.
The 6 neighborhoods with the lowest resources. So for those of you who are local, Hill and New Hallville, West River, West Rock, Fairhaven. And so that was really hyper local. And we did feel like, that was super important. That's where I learned, that's where I really learned about community organizing from many others, and learned the importance of showing up and listening and the compassion. And I want to say, by the way, that was 20 years ago. And I would say for better or for worse, but I was a little sad yesterday. I was at a meeting and people are saying, well, we need to do this. We need to listen and we need to show up. And I was like, come on, we're still having that conversation? Like, that we need that. Okay.
Well
hyper local.
Yep.
Flew across the world, halfway across the world, Singapore, years there. At that moment of reflection, in terms of coming back, I did make a conscious choice. I said, well, I've been living in this other region in the world, and I wanted to retain a global focus. I felt at this point in my career, I'm 62 now. I was probably right around that 60 as I was coming back, and wanted to stay and try to have a big impact. So I wanted to stay at that scale. And then also, out of respect for my care collaborators and the leadership here and the board, did not want to make that confusing. So that's a bit of the local to national to global, and then from global, sort of staying up at that level in many ways. And yet now with the climate work, also working at the city level, so back to some local engagement.
That's wonderful. I mean, so many themes that I see cutting through as well, because you also allude to the rigor with which the work was done at each point, and that, one, it's necessary, but two, it also can help bring others in to see that this is actually having in effect. This is not that it was a side project, but just all the things that we sometimes have to deal with to justify, rightly or wrongly, the work that we're doing. So to see that level of rigor and also to see your intentionality along each step of the way to really have that. And then on top of that, even the strategy, as you talked about, coming back to the States, not just wanting to, I mean, you didn't say it's outright, but just wanting to reinsert yourself and disrupt what had already been going well without you being there. So I think that takes a level of strategy and humility at the same time as well. So again, not surprising, but I just wanted to highlight those pieces. I think that's really important as well.
I think, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I feel humbled by that. And it is interesting both in thinking about this conversation and now being here, you know, to have this look back, look forward moment.
Yeah.
You mentioned the rigor. I do think that's really, really important. And I was part of another local initiative, the Community Leadership Program through the Graustein Foundation. And Heidi Brooks, who's at the School of Management and does many things. I remember we did an exercise and it stuck with me, and it's something I do with my postdocs and younger faculty and in mentorship context. And that is thinking about relevance, relationships, and rigor. And the question, I know you're mentoring me, but I might say to you, and you can deflect if you want, but, you know, for each of those, it's not pick one.
No.
It's in terms of relevance, relationships, and rigor. Do you give, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10 or low, medium, and high, how much do you value each of those? And for me, and I don't have them with me, but I have an old journal, and I have these, you know, there were different size circles and depth of color, and mine were like 3 big dark red discs, meaning like they all really matter to me.
Yeah.
And some people might lead more with relationships or with rigor or with relevance, or, you know, again, it's not an either or, but for you, for me.
That's a great question. I can answer if you want.
Yeah, please.
So, I mean, a few different ways to answer. So I think hearing all 3 of those, my inherent reaction is to say that all 3 of them, it's hard for me to separate them.
Me too.
Because they're so important. But at the same time, there's also the reality of what actually happens in the day-to-day. And if you ask my students, you'd probably get some interesting answers as well. I will say that as a person, I probably put a lot of emphasis on the relational. And I've actually written about this in newsletters and things too. But sometimes at the expense of the rigor, even though that's inherent to who I am, almost in giving people a little bit of a pass to emphasize relationship and let rigor slide a bit. That has changed in the last year and a half. And so it's been an interesting exercise to marry those in a better sense and to think about what does that actually look like in relationship to make sure the rigor is there in terms of expectation and the relevance. So it actually ties back to the conversation we had in the last part of this episode with Dr. Charles DK, who's currently CEO of Connecticut Mental Health Center, and him just talking about excellence too. Excellence in everything that he does across the 4 aspects of mission for the Connecticut Mental Health Center. So I believe, if I remember correctly, clinical, research, community, and education. And making sure that all of those are done with excellence. So again, so I think there's the idealistic, which I'm working towards, and sometimes the reality, which takes time. But it's also a learning process too. Totally. As I sometimes give a little bit too much leeway with one, I see, okay, I need to make sure that ramps up and that they're all at the same level.
And it's back. Yes. I totally agree. And I think, again, it's back to, you know, what's the time, what's the place, who the people. Yeah. And we need to be nimble, agile in those situations. And there are times, of course, when relationship needs to come forward. And that, as you said, even though we've just met, doesn't surprise me.
Okay. That's encouraging.
What about relevance? Yeah, I'm turning the tables here, but what about relevance? Like, what, you know, how does that speak to you?
Yeah, so I think for me, relevance is the initial driving factor when I start. And so it's almost as if, I don't know if this is about to say, it's almost as if the other pieces get pulled along with the relevance too.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, this is the second time I've said this in 2 episodes, but this podcast came about because it seemed important and relevant. But it doesn't mean that everybody caught the relevance. There were people that, I don't want to say intentionally, there are people who definitely missed the relevance, as in, why are you doing that? you're a basic scientist. Why are you getting this global and speaking into these different realms? But then at the same time, I also heard from people who needed it and were getting encouraged by it. So for me, the relevance, even though I said they were all the same, is the leading thing that kind of moves me into that space. But I still try and put attention to all three.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
That's a great
We're
question.
similar that way.
Yeah. So hopefully as people are listening, they're probably learning a little bit about both of us. And it's been a while since someone has asked me questions on the podcast. So it's not surprising to me, but you're doing well with that as well. This time I'm more mentally prepared. I will admit to listeners, the first time someone asked me a question I'd asked them, I didn't know what to say because I wasn't mentally prepared.
Well, I told you, I think this is my first podcast.
Wow.
And it's certainly my first long podcast.
Well, I'm glad that you took the step to join. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that, as you've been saying all this, and again, trying to think on what may be coming up for listeners, I also was going to ask so obviously you have a lot of leadership experience. You have a lot of investment. We talked about some of those themes. But did you go into this thinking, I want to become a leader? Or did that show up at some point? Or did it just happen?
Definitely not the former. I
Okay.
don't think I went into this thinking, I want to be a leader. I saw, I don't know, part of it was I saw things that needed attention. And I found, again, I will say with humility, that maybe I could offer something. And and I'm going to talk about what some of those other characteristics are. But I think I definitely didn't go in saying I'm going to be a leader, but I saw things, and then I saw something else, and I was willing to do more, and I wanted to do more, and I wanted to have impact.
Yeah.
And so I think I find myself here. I won't say in past tense. I find myself here. What's interesting too, though, Nee, is in some ways they're different leadership roles, but I'm stepping back from some leadership roles. I was a program chair, and I led this and I led that and whatever particularly on the academic side. I had a training grant from the National Institute of Mental Health on AIDS prevention for 15 years. Again, it's going strong now in somebody else's hands, and I'm thrilled that that's the case. So I'm able to pick and choose now. And this morning, I chair a global advisory committee on on some climate and health work in cities. But that is intellectually demanding and rigorous, but it's about relevance, relationships, and rigor. But it's not the day-to-day of running a department or being a dean.
Yeah.
So I'm making choices now that give me more flexibility.
Yeah. I would say the question comes up is how, maybe two questions, how and why. And the reason I say that is because there are lots of examples of leaders who do not do that and who stay deeply in the role almost to the point where they can't anymore, and then the transition becomes very messy because there weren't things put in place. So as I'm hearing you talk, I'm seeing that you're not doing that, but it makes me wonder where did you get those tools to have, and now that you're thinking about necessarily, I don't want to put legacy on you yet, because that may not be.
I say, not yet. Let's talk again in a few years.
But in a sense, you're already setting those things up.
Yeah.
Because some of those things have already happened, where it's not going to be this disruptive transition.
What's so interesting is, again, this is a really nice opportunity for me to reflect on this. I've been at Yale my whole career, or Yale affiliated around that Yale NUS piece in Singapore. Yeah. So back to the externality is, she's just been there and stagnant or whatever, monochrome. But that is not the case. And so I've chosen and been offered and been enabled and empowered to take leadership positions within and adjacent to this institution. And so, been able to do that. So the change for me is not university to university, but from, chairing a department, being PI on a grant, running a center or something, and doing each of those for about 10 to 12 years, about a decade.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, moving on to something else. And I do think not so much my own legacy, but and believe me, my ego is intact. I'm not gonna, I want to be inauthentic about that
Right.
in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I do also recognize and value the value of the work and of those relationships and of all, what we've put into place.
Yeah.
So I think that transition planning is really, really important. And so, leaving one thing in somebody's really able hands and supporting them to the, as much or as little as they need, but always being available and then allowing them to change, to refine, change, make better, make different. And that again is a humbling and a bit of a prideful moment when you look and you say, wow, you've taken this to new heights.
Yeah.
You're an amazing chair or director or fundraiser or whatever. So I think that's our responsibility as leaders, let me say.
I agree. What does that look like on a practical basis? Again, because the person receiving could feel freedom to do that, or they could feel a little bit stifled or fear that there's a overarching hand and whatever. I'm not phrasing that well, but
I don't know. When I think about some of these things that I've sort of handed over, I think we've done them in collaboration and in partnership.
Yeah.
So, I've been able to, I'll say, give generously to be done, to feel that I've contributed all I can and that it was really is your time to take this to the next level.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is recognizing that, working together to make sure that the transition is seamless, communicating that to various stakeholders. Yeah. And then I would say letting go, but not letting go and like turning around, running the other direction, letting go. But, these are friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
I've had relationships I've had professional relationships for as long as I've been here, for 36 years. I've been married for 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's doing it together.
Yeah. And I'm sure that, just that the communication piece that you mentioned, but just the relationship too. I think that's a huge dynamic.
That's why I was sort of smiling. I was coming back to that. and also respect. Respect and trust.
Yeah.
Respect and trust.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many parallels between what you and Charles share too. So people are going to hear these back to back and say, okay, there's some clear themes here that are coming out. Because even he was talking about just building those, as a newish CEO. Yeah. And having that time to listen and build that level of trust and build that feedback and make sure there really is a partnership and that he's not up on high, as it were, but really working alongside people. And of course, it takes work to cultivate that, but I can definitely see the way that you've done that over the 36 years in so many ways as well.
It's really nice to just be here with you one-on-one. I think it would have been fantastic to be here with Charles also. And I'm sure, like you said, you're seeing the links, but it would have been nice to have built off some of his energy.
Who knows?
Well.
You never know. There may be something in the future.
Maybe.
I'll just put that out there.
Okay.
I'll just put that out there. So, yeah, that's great. And again, I'm just thinking, as people, this is one of those, I always encourage the listeners, facetiously but seriously, to actually listen back sometimes too, because there's so many important concepts I think that we're covering along the way as well. But with all the different things that you've done, what brings you the most joy? I know that's not an easy question. I'll admit that off the bat. And if you wanted one thing that brings you joy, okay.
Say it again.
Even if you want one thing that brings you joy, it doesn't have to be the most joy.
Okay, yeah. Oh goodness, again. Right away I sort of think, personally and professionally, and before I answer, and maybe a thing in both of those places. I also want to say, and to listeners, and again, another big conversation we could have is not bifurcating those. That our lives are integrated.
Yeah.
And when I learned that, when I figured that out, that was a big sort of operational life lesson. It's not work is from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I think having, for me,
Mm.
this isn't true probably for everybody, but having more permeable boundaries
Mm.
um, helped.
Mhm.
Now I would say probably at this point I have a little
Mhm.
more fixed space, but
Yeah.
the permeability helps.
Mhm.
Okay. Having said that, I'm going to go back to bifurcating and say, joy personally is definitely, my husband, my 2 young
Mm.
adult
Mhm.
kids, um, seeing their movement in the world involved in social justice related
Mm.
things,
Mm.
one on income inequality and one on climate
Yeah,
and
well done.
environment.
Yeah.
So that brings me a lot of joy. And the 4 of us traveling together,
Mm.
living together in Southeast Asia,
Mhm.
and then now having the privilege of being able to be in the world together.
Mm.
And there, for us, people say, "Wow, I can't believe you all like do this together." And I hope they all love it as much as I do.
Mm.
But hiking, art,
Wow.
food,
Yeah.
the people, like those things in a 2 or 3 week trip and being together
Oh, wow.
and like that brings me a ton of
Yeah.
joy. Um, go the whole gym, activity. I'll do a shout out to my
Very
amazing gym
nice.
here. Um, going to the gym, my gym community,
Mm.
my yoga
Mm.
community, a lot of joy
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
Um, and having just sort of art and love
Mm.
in my world.
Mm.
Okay. And then on the work
Mm.
side, what brings me joy? I get really, really excited around the ideation
Mm.
phase.
Okay.
I'm, I like to, as I say, like to say, I think I am, sort of a systems thinker.
Mm.
I
Mm.
like seeing all the
Mm.
connections. I like really digging in, driving down to problems
Mm.
where I think it's not an I, where
Mm.
we can maybe have,
Mm.
have some impact.
Mm.
Um, so I really like the ideation phase, thinking big, and then I need to work with people who are much more operational and
Mm. Mhm.
grounded, and
Mhm.
that's all
Yeah.
good. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then I think the last thing I'll say, which is funny to say this in a "What brings you joy" response, but I have this phrase that I have sort of co-opted. It's not unique to me,
Mm.
but bringing evidence to action
Mm. Yeah.
is something that's very core to
Yeah.
my professional identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I can do that, that
Yeah.
brings me joy.
Yeah. Wow. Really powerful. Again, even
Thanks.
I mean, that was a simple. Well, it wasn't a simple question.
God, that was not a simple question.
It was a succinct question with an important answer. But again, there's so many themes I'm hearing as you're speaking, and just thinking about students and other listeners as well. The fact that in between your second part of that for
Mm.
professionally, the fact that you're so quickly able to go to where your strengths are
Mm,
and your passions, how you operationalize that, and how you also need other people to get
totally.
things done. So I mean, I think that in of itself is a key leadership skill
Mm,
that's important for people to conceptualize and realize. Not that it comes quickly, but to know, well, where are my strengths and passions, and how can I actually put those out and then also do things well without trying to guess and without trying to do everything. You didn't say I try and execute everything by myself.
oh
Or
my
you
gosh,
said I like to
couldn't do it.
ideate and I work with people. So just to bring more attention, I mean, you said it well, but just to kind of highlight
Thank you.
that piece as well, which I think is critical. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
And with this, this always happens, but the time has gone really quickly. But any last words of wisdom or encouragement that you want to share with listeners that, again, maybe listening from inside academia, outside academia, government, all sorts of different places?
That one wasn't on the,
Nope.
pre-read list.
By intention.
Oh, yeah. There's so much, and I mean, there's a lot more we could talk about. So maybe a part 2 at
Mhm.
some point is in order down the road. But I want to say some things that don't come across as being too pithy, but they will, at least a couple. But this idea of following your passion for
Mhm.
sure,
Yeah.
persistence, like yeah, we're gonna get knocked down and get back up and be steadfast and determined and work hard. Um, And, and I'm hearkening back to that thing we were talking about earlier around relationship, finding things that are relevant. That's that drives the passion. I agree with you completely with what you said, which is that's probably the spark. And then we use the relationships and the rigor to build that out and, to bring that all to life. So I would say, all of that, to find your passion and to go with it and to persist and to find the people who you like and respect and want to work with. I mean, there's a lot more, but maybe
that's good, though.
that's
I mean,
a
I think
piece.
that's something, again, people have heard, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again, and always to hear from different people and have it sink in different ways. Knowing the context of your journey as well, it puts it in a different light.
And, I think you asked something about, this sort of look forward moment or what gives me hope back, like full circle, what gives me hope in these troubled times, not just joy and hope, but the hope part. And that one I did think about a little bit ahead. And I do like alliteration, but I sort of came up with both, resilience and resistance. And both of those give me some hope, and I'll take them now in reverse order. And that is the resistance, the standing up for what we believe, for what we know to be important and true and just and important and impactful for ourselves, for our communities, even more importantly, for health, for mental health, for community health, right? So the resistance and the hard work and dedication there. And then recognizing that as human beings, we are resilient, but also that we, those of us who have the opportunity to need to cultivate conditions where people can not only be resilient, but also thrive.
Yeah. So all said.
Thank you.
I'm not going to add anything to that because that was perfect. And I'm just, other than my gratitude for you taking the time to join. And as listeners have now heard, with amongst the many different things that you do, but it still fits your generous nature as well. So definitely appreciate you being here on the IDR podcast.
Thank you, Nee. It was really a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to reflect and cast forward and to share with you and your listeners.
Excellent.
Thank you.